Welcome to Productive Joy with Dr. Christie, where fun meets action.
Hi, friends. Welcome to Productive Joy. You are in for another treat today, and I am so excited to introduce you to my new friend, Danita. But before I do, if you are not already following this podcast, it is so important that you do. That way you get alerts that tell you that these fabulous humans are being interviewed on every Tuesday and Wednesday, and that you get to share those things with others. So please, please, please follow, whether that's on Spotify or Apple or YouTube, and share it with your friends, because today is no exception of all of the great things that I've been getting to do. So I have with me today a new friend. Her name is Danita Cummins, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about Danita before we start. She's an author. She is also a mom of 4, ranging in age from 18 to 25. She's a podcast host. She helps people get through pregnancies and parenthood, whether planned or otherwise, and really supports them in that process. She is a lover of coffee, and she is a closet songwriter, singer who really enjoys writing music. So, Danita, welcome to Productive Joy.
Thanks, Christy. I'm so excited. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. That was very kind. Thank you.
Well, we're going to have some fun together for sure. Yeah. And as you know, people are funny. And so as a fellow podcast host, you know that people listen for about 30 seconds and then they go, yep, I want to listen, or no, I don't. So what would you say to our listeners to convince them that today is a day they must listen to the end?
Oh my gosh, that's so hard. That's like your life legacy in 30 seconds.
Yeah, right. You can do it. I have faith in you.
That's right. I will say that the reason why they should listen today is I hope that through this conversation, we can give them some tools and wisdom to help them find peace and clarity in their life, which I think we're all struggling with, and just hoping to share some really great things about the value that they have and hold in the world, and why their life is so important, why it matters.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So that's no tall order, my friend. And yet we're going to do it in 30 minutes or less. How exciting is that?
So these are the 5 steps to live your life well. Yeah,
exactly. Right. And then you're done and you don't ever have to think about it again. Well, I haven't seen a wand anywhere, so I know that we're not going to sprinkle pixie dust on anybody, but we are going to give some practical tips, right? Because you've written a book, and your book, Promise Over Purpose, by itself, by title, is exciting. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about Promise Over Purpose?
Sure. Thanks for that. I will say that when I first started writing, the discovery journey of writing, I learned a lot during the process. And I was sitting with a young girl at our youth group Bible study. My husband and I were co-leading for a season. And she was about 15 as a freshman. And she looked with this intense look on her face. And she said, I don't know my purpose. And at first, my mom heart just kind of exploded for her, because I was like, your purpose, you're 15. You know what I mean? Like, you're just trying to figure out the things. And being 15 is really hard, right? Teenage life is so hard. So it was like, I almost laughed at the time, because I thought, she can't really be this overwhelmed, right? This much anxiety. But then I looked around the room, and the other girls, they all nodded, and they were college students and they were high schoolers. And my heart just melted for them in that season. And I thought, no. Like, this is not the weight and burden that you should carry right today. There's so much possibility. Like, do you see yourself, right? Do you see the beauty that you have in you every single day, right? Your identity, your value. Like, don't let this be the, that like this deception that you carry. And so I went home from that with just this mom heart of just like burdened for them for a long time. So really the book started from just sitting literally in the room with these women, and then talking with women across the spectrum of my life, and men too, because I work a lot in the military space, but it was really, I kept coming back to these things. Like, when we all ask our question, what is my purpose? We'll ask it 1,000 times in our lives, but it's like we ask one question and we're expecting one answer. And that's not how life works, right? It's not. So every time something hard happens, or every time we lose a job, or every time we lose a loved one, or in different seasons when we go from moms of littles to moms of bigs, and I started to see this theme, like my 93-year-old grandmother's asking, what is my purpose, Danita? And my 15-year-old freshman is asking, what is my purpose? And my single mom of, 3 kids at the pregnancy center is like, Mom, what is my purpose? And my friend, who was at the time struggling with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer at 32, she was like, what is the purpose of this? And we all come back to this big question. Mm-hmm. So I sat very much with the Lord and asked the question, like, Lord, is there a purpose that you've given us, just one little thing that we all wear, like a coat we're supposed to put on and carry around for our whole life? But that doesn't really happen. That's not really happening in my friends' lives, in my life. So is there a better way for me to live? And it came back to the promises that God says, I have loved you with an everlasting love. I will never leave you. And then I started to just lean into that space and say, well, if this promise is true, right? If this one promise is true that you love me with an everlasting love, are there others? And can I live my life in the promise every day, knowing that God has a purpose and it's divine and it might not make sense to me? I might not get an answer to why babies die. I might not get an answer to why, cancer is a real thing. But I have a promise that I can hold on to every single day. Yeah. So if I can live in the promise every day, then I find a peace in my life and in my circumstances that I can get through, today and tomorrow. And so that's really the book, is how you live in the promise instead of chasing after this purpose, and finding peace in God's promises for our lives.
You just explained that so beautifully, and I think that will resonate with most of the people that are listening, right? So this podcast is for leaders who want to do it differently, who want to show up differently, who want to approach life differently. And what you just said is so valuable, that there's one question, but there's so many different answers to that question. And it depends on the phase of life. It depends on the circumstance. It depends on what's happened to you and with you and for you and against you.
Right.
How great that you have taken the time to put everything together into a space where people can pick it up and say, okay, I needed this particular passage today. I needed this particular promise today. Well done on you that you didn't hide that you chose to share it.
Thank you. That's very kind.
Well, it's true. Many people know these things to be true, but they don't take the time to share it with anybody else. And then, you're the only one that's benefiting from the gifts that you've been given. So you're sharing your gift with others. I'm going to guess that this has been a lifelong journey for you, right? Like that you didn't just wake up one day. Yes, that circumstance happened with those youth kids. My husband and I were youth pastors also, and the things that we saw happen, and then the fun of them now being in their early 40s and watching them having gone through life. There's something special that happens at that age, right? At that 15, 16, 17 to 25 range. But what happened before then, when you were growing up, that made you realize that you were made for more and that you had a lot to share? Because I'm sure there is a story there.
Oh, that's such a hard, it's a good question. It's such a great question. You always ask such good questions, I'll just say. So I grew up in Oklahoma, in the oil fields of Oklahoma. My dad worked in the oil field. My whole family worked in the oil field. So very much, hard day's work. Both my grandfathers were farmers, worked the ground every day of their life, raised what they ate, all those things. So I come from that background of just hard work and diligence and, all those things. But it was really hard life. And so there was a lot of abuse. There was a lot of really hard things that were mixed in there. Mm-hmm. And so at a really early age, I learned this balance between this really, really work hard and then trying to still also understand that love looks different sometimes, than what you receive or what you see. So I took all that into the adult world. I joined the military when I was a senior in high school and delayed enlistment and went off and joined the Air Force. Best thing I could have ever done, because again, it was very much like I knew I needed to break away. I didn't know what I needed or where I was going, but I knew that I needed something different. And so I joined the military and I say ran away from home and was surrounded by amazing leaders, right? People who poured into me, who challenged me, who held me accountable, who did all the things that we do really well in the military. But I also had this underlying perfectionist, firstborn daughter of an alcoholic, all the things going on, right? So I did really well with checklists and straight lines. And my kids will tell you, straight lines, I write about it in the book. Straight lines worked really well in our family until the moment that they didn't.
Yeah, sure.
Which really turns into shame, fear, control, right? So it took me a life of 40 plus years to kind of unwrap all those pieces of things. And so I think that this book very much is just as much a discovery journey for myself as I have put these, I say, idols before me, in my life and different seasons of my life, and then watch them fall down. Performance, purpose becomes performance. So for me, firstborn daughter, of alcoholic, I'm very good at straight lines and keeping things in line. And in the military culture, I was very successful. And they gave me badges that I got to wear on my chest because of it, right? So there's that all these things that were happening in my life. And then I realized that that job ended. I lost that, left the military, this series of things. And so you're like struggling with really at the core, it's your identity, like who am I really after all these things kind of fall apart, give way. And then there's another big part of that when we talk about our pain and the purpose of our pain. We say that a lot, like, we have something that hurts us or someone hurts us. And then once we go through our healing journey, we're like, maybe we can use this to help somebody else, So there's almost like an upside down idol of pain that we put before us. So I think in my life, as I go through that season, those different things, the Lord has been very faithful to like take a piece out as I've held onto it and said, nah, it's not exactly it. Yeah. And so, you're right. It's definitely, the book is a culmination of all of those experiences and just my own like faith journey, as I've kind of held them up to the Lord and said, is this true? I use the Hunger Games analogy a lot, where like Peeta's like, is this true or not true? And Katniss is like, not true. And I'm like, is this true or not true? And the Lord's like, not true. Give me that. Yeah. So.
Well, and it's so many things. First of all, thank you for your service. Thank you for giving back. And then I feel like that's what you've done with your whole life is you've given back. You've said, you know what? I have been given these gifts, but I'm not going to hold on to them. I'm going to share them with others. I'm going to make sure that other people don't have to walk the same paths that I had to walk painfully, right? That you have taken a machete and kind of cut the way a little bit for people so that they don't have to get poked with all the briars that were there when you were. To paint a picture, you said you grew up on a farm and, well, not farm, but in that space, right? And then I picture, so I grew up in Virginia, and bush hogging and taking a machete to a path was a thing that we did often. And I think that's really what you've done for people. Whether it was the girls in your youth group or the people that have read your book, you've taken a machete to the path and you've made something really easier to, not easy. It's still not easy, but it's easier than it would have been if they were the first to go through it. That's probably that firstborn part, right?
Maybe. Yes.
That's all you know how to do is to forge the way and help others get there as well. You're a beautiful soul and you are bringing that to others. How cool is that? So you do that in a lot of different spaces. You don't just have a book. You also have a business around this. So tell me, if somebody was listening and they're like, oh my gosh, she is speaking my language. I need her to cut a path for me. How would they go about getting your help?
That's so good. So I think two spheres, right? It's her two spheres. So serve and bivocational ministry. So that's obviously very specific to a woman who's working through, an unplanned pregnancy crisis thing. So ideally, most of your listeners are not in that space, but if they are, they can totally reach out. And there's an amazing world of people who are willing to help with open hands and open hearts, like you said, every day. But what I do for my business is I have a coaching and consulting business. So I really do thrive, I guess, in the space of strategic planning. So if you were going to come to me and say, should I work with Danita? Like can she even help me? I would tell you very specifically, if you're in the place where you're trying to get clarity, where you're like, what am I going after? What do we need to work on like today, tomorrow? And how can I build a no kidding tactical like roadmap that's I'm going to be able to execute that gives me clarity? Like it's one thing to say strategy, like, oh, here's your strategic plan. It's 3 to 5 years out. It's big picture, vision, mission, values. But then we struggle because we're like, okay, but what am I going to do today with the $3 and the 3 people, right? And so that's where my strengths, I think, are different than a majority of the world. And I will say also that I help people in the defense tech space mostly today because that's my experience. So I got out of the military and stayed in defense contracting and worked as a Department of Army civilian, worked with the special operations community for years, all in technology development and acquisitions and contracts. And so that's my wheelhouse. So if you have a manufacturing company, I'm probably not going to be able to help you, But if you have a technology program, either nonprofit, because I started a nonprofit, so I work really, I understand that space. So if you have a nonprofit or you have a for-profit company or a solo entrepreneur that's in that technology space that's trying to figure out how do I move forward, then those are the clients that I most benefit, in my business, my consulting business.
That is so cool. And what a neat niche, right? Like you wouldn't know that just by even reading your book, you wouldn't know that, but that's who you have become in the world of work, right? Like we have to do that part.
Yes.
And I
That's
love
right.
that you're able to bring your faith into that and you're able to help people in a very specific and tried and true way. It's not like you didn't walk this path. You've walked this path. You've started your own businesses and you've made those things happen. So you are the kind of person that would help people well. I have no doubt,
Yeah.
even in the short
Thank you.
time that you and I have known each other. So my most favorite question to ask people is, it has to do with the title of the podcast. So I named this podcast Productive Joy because I think that if you don't make work fun, people quit. And it's because we quit things that aren't fun, right? But everybody's definition of fun is a little unique and different. And so it's my most favorite question because I've yet to get the exact same answer twice. But if you had to describe productive joy, how would you describe it?
I think for me, I think productive joy is that space where you find clarity and we say a lot, you can let your yes be yes and your no be no. But I think when you get into that space where you're like very confident that this is where I'm going, this is what I'm doing, and so you are productive, you are making an impact, you are moving the needle, you are getting things done, but you're doing it from that place where you just have this peace and this clarity and confidence, which is where that joy comes from, right? We can talk about joy, I think, sometimes in the hard and still find joy, even if it doesn't feel good today, right? Joy is not always a feeling, but there is that place where we want to get to that place of peace, of like knowing that, hey, my time, talents, and treasures matter, and I'm committed my hand to this thing, and that brings a sense of clarity and I think in confidence. So that's what I think of.
Oh my gosh, I love it. And I don't think I've ever had anybody say it exactly like that it's clarity, which turns into confidence, which turns into your ability to make an impact. I think we dance around all three of those things. We think we have to jump right into the work, but you can't jump into the work if you don't know what the work is. You can't be confident in the work if you don't know clearly what's my role in this and where am I supposed to be. And so as a leader, I think what you're saying is true about creating productive joy. We have to be clear. Clear is kind, right? We know that. And you
Right.
mentioned shame and guilt. I'm a big Brene Brown fan for that reason, because she really does talk about the fact that vulnerability and confidence are actually the same thing, but also that clear is kind. That's my favorite Brene Brown phrase. So I'm holding on to that from what you just said. But then that confidence comes in knowing, okay, this is my role in this space.
That's right.
This is what I do, not my purpose. Because like you said, your purpose might be different depending on the day and the what's going on, but it's the promises that I'm supposed to be here. That is such a neat, and I'm sure you didn't give it the kind of thought that would have allowed you to make that tie together. It's just who you are.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It is just simply who you are, and you're creating productive joy all the time. So here's a tough question, but one I think you're going to be able to tackle. How would you recommend that leaders create productive joy in their space? Do you have, I know you don't have a wand. We already established that.
Right.
But what,
That's right.
what would you
Just
do?
a girl.
Yeah, exactly. How would you help people create that version of productive joy in their workspace?
I do. I think from where I sit in the lens where I sit today and where my heart is the clarity first, like you said, being very clear about what you're going after and why you're going after it. And then as hard as it is measuring or being able to quantify, are you actually reaching the goals that you think that you are? Because most of the time, candidly, we are not, right? So do these resources actually move the needle or do they not, right? We talk about productivity, like we put all that at the checklist, right? Like, did we meet margins? Did we meet revenue margins? Did we meet sales quotas? Did we do XYZ? But we don't often know why we're even measuring those things or what those metrics are for. So I think from a leadership perspective, on the organizational leadership side, you have a responsibility to do that, right? Even if it's hard. You give a responsibility to be intentional and set those things before you and do the hard work to measure. And then when you're not, that's a hard leadership kind of conversation, but we have a responsibility to adjust, don't just let it keep going. So I think that part on the organizational design, I see like getting very clear about what you're going after and why you're going after it and be able to measure that and be authentic and transparent if you're not, which then puts in the human side of it. That's why I love organizational design. And it's because we've got organizations that are ecosystems that are constantly moving and changing and they have their own life cycle. And then you have the humans that are inside those organizations that are constantly moving and changing, who are constantly going through their own stuff. And I feel like the human element, right, of leadership, that all the human stuff gets in the way and we are, overwhelmed. So I think that same piece on the human side of it too is just getting to that place of transparency, right? and vulnerability, which doesn't have to be crying in the boardroom, but just that place of being as a leader saying, I don't actually know, but my heart is that I want this to matter. My heart is that I want to provide quality products and services to a customer. My heart is I want an efficient and effective government system. My heart is that I want a church or nonprofit to really meet the mission needs that we say that we're going to meet. So we're going to do the hard work to be, clear about what we need to do. And then love the people who are in that space along the way. I think that's so important today, every day, but especially today.
Yeah. Oh, I couldn't agree more. And we are in people businesses, whether we think we are or not. It doesn't matter if you're in the tech space, right? You might think, well, I'm not in the people business. Yeah, you are. We all are. And I think we sometimes struggle to communicate it. And that's what I wrote down when you said, okay, we have checklists to measure, but what are we measuring? Are we measuring the right things? And then how do we communicate that that's what we're measuring? And here's why. Now that takes me back to you mentioning you were really good at checklists and you were really good at straight lines, right? That felt right to you. So it doesn't surprise me that you recognize the value of having a roadmap and having it be very clear and linear and make sense. So what happens when it gets crazy and it goes off the straight line? What do you do in that space? How do you handle it? Like let's pretend you were consulting me in my business and everything straight lined went a little wonky. How would you help me get back on track?
I would. This is probably the other part of my consulting company that I love is working at the level that I get to work at the C-suite level with the leaders and having that vulnerability and that kind of behind the door conversation when the CEO says, I don't really know. When you say, hey, let's look at the stuff. It's okay, right? Again, there's no judgment here. Let's just pull it out and look at it, like the parenting piece. So we would pull it out and look at it. And then I would ask you very, gently and through a series of conversations, Christie, why do you think that went left, right? What were you trying to achieve? What target were you trying to hit? And then if you hit 3, paces left, do we just need to rescope your, target? Is it a little bit of that? Or is there something else going on? Which I see a lot in smaller businesses and larger businesses too, I think, because they start to scale. And then the visionary leader, because their gifting is in vision, they see possibilities everywhere. And so I spent a lot of time with visionary leaders kind of trying to help them channel that into very specific goals and steps for today, because their shot group gets so big and then they're like, you're doing 12 things, but your vision was this. So is that really what you want to do? So that's a series of kind of questions. So if your shot group was off and you were target, you were way left of where you thought you needed to be, it would be, hey, Christie, was this the real target? Or is there something else going on with you as a visionary leader where you're like, I want to go after this other thing now, right? Because you're a person who's constantly moving and changing, So I try to help organizations create agile frameworks. I'm a PMP, and so I work a lot in agile methodologies and have spent a lot of time in software development. So I try to use those models in my business coaching to just kind of say, okay, you don't set it and forget it, So we say, hey, we wanted to be here. That's where that feedback loop is so important, and so important. And helping them kind of see if there is a shift, if the market is shifting, that's okay. You need to know that as a business owner, right? You need to know that you're selling a sweater for giraffes that nobody's ever going to buy, or, so that's, it's an analogy I heard from a different person, but I use that a lot because that's really true. Are you selling something that someone wants to buy? So there's just a lot that goes along with that. And I think from a leadership perspective and coaching, it's really, for me, it's the heart of that person, and just giving them a safe space, because candidly, most of the time they don't have that. They don't have a space where they can sit down and be like, actually, I don't know. I don't even know if I want to do this anymore. And you're like, it's okay. Yeah. How do we do that well?
So what cadence do you recommend that sort of thinking happen? Is that a weekly check-in? Is that a quarterly check-in? And how frequently do you find is the sweet spot for checking in on that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think it depends on the team and it depends on the person. So I've done weekly coaching with like solo entrepreneurs who have the time to invest, and they're really at the place where they're mentally and emotionally ready to like do the deep work,
Mm-hmm.
But then that is very few and far between. The majority of them, it's like every couple of weeks, we check in. I have other teams where I'm a consultant and I'm attending their biweekly syncs, So I think it depends. And then there's obviously an annual strategic planning,
Sure.
like where are we big picture? So I try to tailor that to the person and the team and really what the priority is today. If you're like potentially losing your company because you have to make revenue, like right now, you don't have time to, you got to keep the lights on,
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think everything you're doing is so powerful. And as we think about aiming at a particular target, that my company is called AIM, and it stands for Analyze, Improve, Move. But the idea is you set a target and then you take aim. You analyze the things you're currently doing, you improve on those things, and then you move towards the target that you're meaning to hit. But, you've heard, I'm sure, that we're 1 degree off and you end up in a completely different place if you don't correct. And so that's why I asked how often. I love that it is specific to the human, but I wonder how many people are listening right now who have never recalibrated to their target and have had this target for years and gone, well, this is where I'm going and this is what I'm doing. But is it still? Or are you maybe in need of? And so I love that you are that sensical person, that voice of reason in the space that says, hey, are you sure that's really where you want to go? Because this is what you said you wanted to do, but everything you're doing is actually going to get you way over here. And is that what you're hoping for? I also think it's really cool that you have this business and this book that are fully intertwined, whether anybody ever realizes it or not, and yet could be seen as two completely separate things. So I would love to know how you weave the two together, because, there's the separation of church and state thing, right? Like as a society, we don't always see faith as belonging in the business space or in any other space. And yet if it's who you are, it's just who you are. How do you blend the two?
It's interesting because when I started my consulting business 4 years ago, I guess now, all of the organizations that I've worked with, they're all led by faith-driven leaders, which was not by design, when I did my business plan marketing strategy. And they're all men, which is interesting too.
That is interesting.
I know. I have another business coach. She was like, I thought you coached women. I was like, actually, I've never coached a woman. I only ever coached men. I coach women at the pregnancy center all day long. You know what I mean? I'm surrounded by women there. But in the business coaching and consulting world, it's always been men. By and large, that just seems to be the leader populace of, who's leading those companies in the defense tech space. So I have worked with them and I've watched, their conversations about purpose and about meaning and how to lead and the struggles that they have. So the way I just have had the opportunity, to, when I talk about visionary leaders and leading from the promise, the beautiful thing is I've had the opportunity to talk with these leaders about spiritual gifts, about how they show up in the world, about how their visionary leadership might look like something just in the world, but the reality is God has created them with this gift of apostleship or this gift of setting wrong things right, and how you can translate and see that there is very much a lot more going on at play than we really do. And so for some of them, it's been a really beautiful opportunity to really talk about the promises and to talk about how do you live in the promise every day? How do you live in the promise of grace? How do you live in the promise of provision? How do you live in the promise of wisdom? Those are the core promises that I talk about in the book. In the third part of the book, I break out what the promises of God are and how these three, wisdom, grace, and provision, we come back to every day, whether we know it or not, right? Like if I need grace, it will never end. I'll need the promise of God's grace in every single moment of every single day. I will need God's wisdom, the promise of wisdom, because I'm seeking it for decisions I have to make. How do I lead my team better? How do I do offsets, And I have to trust in the promise of provision. And provision is not always money, right? God's word is very clear. But there is a promise that God will give us provision when we need it, how we need it, and he's sovereign. And so as leaders, I think specifically faith-driven leaders, which is really where my heart is if we can see this intersection as not separate things, right? That there's this infusion all together, and to start to see like, okay, how do I lead from the promise of provision? How do I have that quiet confidence? How do I walk into a boardroom and say, I can't say this out loud to you, but I do trust that God has a provision and a plan, and I'm going to pray for the wisdom. I'm going to pray for the clarity, and lead my team from that place, even if I never say it, in a meeting. That's really how I'm using this very tactical book about purpose and God's promises and very intimate in your life and how it can show up in the world.
Oh, Danita, I am so glad you're doing what you're doing. And I know you're changing the world one human at a time. And I
Very
have a
sweet.
feeling there's going to be at least a handful, if not many more, people who are going to want to use your services and to call on you to help them. So I am curious how somebody might get in touch with you. What's the best way for somebody to find all of your brilliance?
Oh, that's very kind. Brilliant. That's very sweet. We have two websites, but for my personal brand, it's danitacummins.com. So, and I show up on all the socials the same way, thankfully. It's kind of a unique name, so it wasn't taken. So that's the best place to reach out for my personal website. And on there's a link to consulting and coaching. And there's obviously more information about the book, the podcasts, so they can subscribe to those things as well. And then our business is Cummins Consulting Group. And so that, is very much like business directed, but they can find me through my own personal channels and get access to all that information.
Well, and I was looking at it earlier today, and it is not only aesthetically very pleasing, but very easy to navigate as well. So friends, get on there and find her because and you can look in the show notes as well. There are some brilliant things that you can grab right away and use. And that's what my recommendation is always, right? Like find ways to create productive joy, grab those nuggets of wisdom. So I could talk to you all day, but we know that people have a short attention span. So we are going to do some rapid fire questions. Are you excited? Okay.
I am.
I know. High pressure. Here we go. Danita, what is your definition of fun?
My definition of fun is when my calendar is completely clear and there's nothing scheduled and I can just live in the moment, mostly with my big kids, my family, my big kids. But it involves a lot of coffee, laughing, and some really loud music with a really solid drum line.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Oh, what a wonderfully specific visual that you just created. That's pretty great. Okay, how do you know that you're showing up as your authentic self?
I cry a lot, which I don't know which my kids will tell you. Mom cries all the time now. But I've learned to be vulnerable in this space. I obviously don't cry in meetings, but yeah, just I feel like in this space I have a great piece that I'm, following, where I will say God's, call in my life and loving people to the best of my ability and not leaving anything on the table for as much as I can. So
that's beautiful. All right. How do you channel your best self on your worst days?
I take lots of breaks now. I rest. I try to in this season love myself. Well, like this season, will be, it's just like giving myself the rest that I need. So yeah.
And not myself. Or I was going to say, and not just running full tilt at all times. What a brilliant thing to learn. How did you learn that? How did you learn to take breaks? Because I don't know too many humans who are really good at that.
I lost my job, which is how I started my consulting company. I was working for a defense aerospace company during COVID. And like very many people, I got no notice laid off. And I had a foot surgery, so my ankle was fused. So I physically could not walk for weeks.
Oh, gosh.
And I was literally in my bed, laid off. I couldn't run away from it. You know what I mean? Like I couldn't work it out. I couldn't clean the house. I couldn't go shopping. Like I literally had to sit in the chair and just lay there. And so I learned a lot about myself, in that space. And so now I just, I try to be very kind to myself. Like if I'm tired, I just take a break, or say, no, I can't do that now,
Very smart. And I'm glad that you carried the lesson with you. I think we all learned a lot of lessons during COVID, but we didn't hang on to all of them. Like I'm watching the busyness sneak back in and the constant go, go, go. And I'm like, why? We learned that it doesn't have to be that way. So what are we doing?
Yeah.
And the older I get, the better I am at pressing pause, but I'm not great at taking breaks yet. So I'm going to take a page out of your book on that one. All right. Last question. And this one's going to be hard. We admitted it was going to be hard before we even started. So when people listen to something like this, they tend to latch on to one thing that they can really take with them. So of all the beautiful things that you've said, what's the one thing that you really want to leave people with today?
Yeah, I think, like you said, if I never see you again or never talk to you ever again, and this is how I live my life at the ministry, because women will come in and I'll never see them again. So I get one chance is to just let them know that their life matters, right? That they are created in the image of an amazing God who loves them and died for them. And that there is a great hope, no matter what stands in front of them, cancer, all the hard things we deal with every single day, that it does matter, that their hearts do matter. And so not to forget that in the busyness, like you said, like we all get to the end of our lives one day and we ask this question, what was my purpose and what is my life for? We'll all ask it and just know that, that they matter. Their lives matter.
Thank you for that reminder. I think we all need that today. So friends, if you are listening, you now know that you do matter and that we do think that you're very special. And so Danita, thank you for your time today. Thank you for choosing to share this wonderful knowledge that you've gained, that not the easy way, right? Not the straight line way, but the wavy, jig-jaggy line. And you're choosing to let it shine through. You are such a beautiful soul. And I'm so grateful that you chose to spend some time with Productive Joy. And friends, my Productive Joy friends, I'm glad you are still listening. I hope that you will share this episode and all episodes with your friends because we all need a little shot of B12. And that's exactly what Danita gave us today. So do me a favor, and no matter what else you take away from this, figure out a way to turn fun into action.